Hello pretties, welcome to Best. So today I have a video that I feel like most of you guys are waiting for. This is the one that I'm most excited for to seeing at the end of the year, which is ranking all the palettes that I tried in 2022. So I have a total of 11 palettes, I believe. Let me just check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 11. So this is a no makeup Gaia as a partner kind of video because I just kind of felt like it. So there's that. Although I am having a really nice hair day, so we're just putting that out there. And my dark circles are awful today because I didn't go to sleep till like 3 in the morning and I woke up before 9 a.m. I think it was like 8:15 when I woke up and I was like, all right, I guess I'm up. And that was that. I'm doing this a little bit different than I have in previous years in the sense that I actually have some criteria that I'm going over, but at the same time, I am kind of doing this on the fly. So if you see me pausing from time to time or just awkward, like edits, because I do have a pause button with this camera that I'm using, so it's easier for me to just like pause, take a minute to like get myself together and then do it. There's that. I don't want to like think about it too much. I really would just want to go with it with my feel, and there's that. I do want to say I don't have any problems with with any of the formulas this time around. I really like all of them. However, some formulas I feel like are better than others, so there's just gonna note that. I did film a video a little while ago which was kind of talking about all the formulas that I've tried like ever. It's a really long video, but if that's something you're interested in and you kind of want to hear that out, I think it's really interesting. I love hearing people talk about like the different formulas I've tried. I know that there's a lot of ranking videos of formulas and whatnot. It's not quite that detailed, but if you're interested, I'm gonna put in the little eye, so check it out. That being said, there is one formula that is not in that video because I just recently purchased it. Give me a second, guys. Oh god. All right, I had to keep the dogs under control. So, all right. Not all of his palettes dropped in 2011. A lot of them, sorry, 2020. In 2022, a lot of them dropped before, but I purchased them in 2022, or at least I tried them for the first time in 2022, because the Zendo palette from Natasha Denona, technically I bought that one in 2021, but I didn't open it until 2022. So I'm counting for my 2022 videos. All right. This one is hard because I actually legitimately like all of this palettes. There's not a real like dud per se, but this one's gonna get me in trouble, I feel like. Number 11, I'm gonna go with Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde. So I heard a lot of good things about Huda Beauty. I'm sure you guys have heard as well. I feel like a lot of people like talk it up. Some people even rank it in their top 3, or some people have even said that this is their favorite eyeshadow formula. So I snatched up the Mercury Retrograde because I found it for a ridiculously price tag off. I think I got it for $27 and it's worth $67, or usually retails for $67. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a steal. Let's go. I will say the color story is rather pretty, and the reason why I picked this specific Huda Beauty palette is because I feel like a lot of her palettes are very monochromatic, and that is not my style. I do like to kind of switch things up. I want it to be a range of color, and this one didn't quite. This one offered a lot more. So color story, I think is very pretty. I think it has some really cool and interesting shadows in here. Like this one's right here. I think this is a really pretty. This is really interesting as well. This one surprisingly really caught my eye because it looks like just like a golden shade, but it's actually like a rose gold. It's like a dual chrome shade. Like I'm looking at the camera and it looks quite golden, but I'm looking at it from the side mirror and it looks pink. Like from my side view, it looks pink. So I think it's very pretty. I think formula wise, it blends well, but my problem, and if you saw the formula video, you will know what I'm talking about. These colors are not true to pan, and some of them, a lot of them, lean rather pink, even when they're orange. So like this peachy salmon shade, it's gonna pull pinky for whatever reason. Same thing with this one. Same thing with this more neutral shade, even with this one, they all kind of look pink. And the reason why I got this palette is because I wanted to have an array of shadows, and I feel like I was missing that. Also, I feel like it's missing a little bit of depth. You have one deep color right here, and a bunch of light shades. So I feel like it needed a little bit of depth in some of those medium shades. Like this one, I feel like is the only one. This one's actually quite soft. Even this one's a little soft. I wish there was a little more depth in it. So formula wise, I think that's where they lost me. I think the color story is quite pretty, but this is where they lost me. My friend Karen, this is her go-to favorite palette. She has pans all over. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And for the other thing criteria that I'm looking for is gap in my collection. This is not a gap in my collection. I have all these colors, like all of them. I think the formula is a little bit different, and I was kind of interested. I think there's a little bit of different textures, and I really appreciate that. But at number 11, I was expecting more, especially for how hyped up this formula is. And I just feel like it didn't quite do that. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Okay. All right, so for number 10, I'm just looking and I think I'm stressing myself out. I'm gonna go to an Eclipse from Lunar Beauty. I will say though, if I had gotten this later, I probably would have gotten the newer one that he came up with. That's like the Eclipse one too, but it's like the more soft, warm pink one. I think I would have gotten that one. I think that one would have been more up my alley. Now, these are nudes, which I do very well with nudes, and I did get it specifically because this is a cooler tone palette, and I don't have too many cool tones in my collection. So in Gap and my collection, it's definitely filling a gap that I didn't have before, which was this grays and navy colors that actually didn't look ashy on me. These dogs. Okay, we're back. I had to kick them out. Only Athena's in the room now because she was being chill and the other ones weren't, so it is what it is. Anyway, some of the silvers, more blue tones, even some of these more neutral shades are quite cool tones. So I was needing to fill those gaps in my collection because I've been wanting to try more cool tones. However, I just feel like this color story is kind of harder to work with for me because it's not colors that I have in my wardrobe, and I like to try to match my makeup to my wardrobe, and so I have a hard time reaching for this palette for that. Also, I don't love his shimmer formula. I feel like his shimmer formula leaves a little bit something to be desired. Give me a second. There's something about it where I wish it was more, it had a bit more of a kick. And some of this, and it has to be a matter of like different formulas, because some of the shadows here do have a really impactful like shimmer formula, but then some of them don't. So I feel like it's quite inconsistent. Obviously it has to do with the formula. Some of them are supposed to be topper shades or whatever, but even some of the topper shades, I feel like, I don't know, I have a hard time getting them to stick on my lid, and I usually go with shimmers with my finger, and that's the best way to apply shimmers. I do feel like you need a glitter glue, which is not something that I'd like to reach for all the time. I own one, it's just not, I feel like it's an extra step, and I don't always feel like the need to have to do that. Regardless, I really like it. It got me out of my comfort zone when it comes with cool tones. It's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm missing something with this palette. So there's that. Regardless, I actually I do like the formula a lot, except for some of the shimmers, like I said. Color story thing is very pretty. Definitely has a gap in my collection. It's just, there's a reason I don't have a lot of these colors in my collection. It's not a color story that I normally reach for. There you go. There's that. So that was number 10. So for number 9. Okay. This was kind of newer. So this is a Star Wars palette. FYI, I also have the Mandalorian. So for Christmas, my sister got me both of these. I was really thinking, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, that I was looking into getting the Glam palette from Tasha and Nona, and I was also very much tempted by the Retro Glam. I'm not particularly interested in the pinks. I was very much so interested in the greens. So this was essentially the alternative to those. So I'm gonna put this one at number 9. I actually think it's quite pretty, and there is a gap in my collection that it's meeting. I do have a lot of greens because it's my favorite colorful eyeshadow to use. greens are my favorites. I just feel like with my olive complexion and with my brown eyes, they just make my eyes pop and it just blends really beautifully into my skin. I know a lot of people cannot say the same thing, but with my olive skin tone, it actually works very well for me. And I don't particularly have this specific tones in green. I have soft mint greens, but this is more of a sage. I have olive greens, but this one, it's like an army green, which I don't quite have that, and I don't quite have something like this. So I think it does meet something. All of the shimmers, I feel like I have something similar to this one. I don't quite think I have something similar to this. This one looks quite golden, but it's actually a dirty olive, which I do have other shades like this in my collection, even from Colourpop. I think there's one in the So Jaded palette. So overall, it meets some gaps in my collection, but not a lot. I personally love greens, so I'm quite happy with this. Formula-wise, I think this is a good formula from Colourpop. I know they can be quite inconsistent, but overall, I think this one's actually quite good. And I haven't had any problems with it. I haven't played with it much, obviously, because I just got it a couple weeks ago. I got my gift a little early, FYI. Color story, I feel like obviously you can only do 2 kinds of looks. You're gonna do a green look, or you're gonna do a neutral look that leans slightly green. And that's pretty much it. Those are the only options. And because the color story is quite limited, it's very, very much so monochromatic, I am putting it a little bit lower. So there's that. Otherwise, I actually think it's quite good. I don't have much complaints. I think these are some very impactful shimmers, and I quite enjoy it. It's like a silvery green. You know what it is that these 2 shades are almost like cool tone greens, which is quite strange because I feel like green's a very warm shade. It's a very warm color. So I do think it's a little unique in my collection. So that was number 9. Okay, for number 8. Ooh, this one, I think this one hurts my soul to say this. But it's going to be the Whimsical Nudes from Los Angeles. I mentioned it as I did a 1 week 1 palette, and I did like a mini review towards the end of it. I feel like I already know I love the Los Angeles formula. That's not a problem. Got my collection. I have all these colors in my collection over and over again. I think this specific dual chrome shade was a little bit interesting. I don't think I had anything quite like it, but I do have other things that are somewhat similar, and I could probably get a similar effect with it. But that being said, every other shade in here I have in my collection over and over again. My biggest problem with this is actually the color story specifically. I feel like it's missing some shades. First off, I don't particularly think we need a cream shade, but if it's there, I don't mind it. I do feel like it probably needed a neutral brown, but after playing with it some more, if you layer these 2 on top of each other, they kind of neutralize the orange in this warm tone brown, and it actually makes it a little easier, and it looks a little more neutral. I feel like it looks quite good. My biggest issue is this shade right here. Is entirely too light to be the crease transition shade for the entire palette. Even I feel like I'm not that dark. I have tan skin because I'm Hispanic, but I'm not that dark. I'm like a light to medium, and I find this to be a little too light. The good thing about Los Angeles is that you can definitely build that color up, and you can build it and add more pigment, and it's gonna show up. So that's a saving grace of this. But I do feel like somebody that's a lot darker than me, there's only so much you can build this color up to, because it's a light yellow, you know, like a peachy yellow. There's not much you can do. Like, there's only so much depth you can add to it. So I do feel like if you're somebody that is darker, you're not going to be able to do much with it. So essentially this could be your like setting shade, like the one you shade your eyeshadow primer with, and then this can be turned into your highlight shade. But then, and I guess if that's the case, that could be your, this would turn into your new crease transition shade if you're a lot darker. But then I also feel like if you do that, then you're missing some color variation in your transition, because you don't always want to go with something warm. And what I've noticed is if you really want these greens to pop and look a lot more green, then you really needed to have only the yellow down and not use this shade. But if you have to use this one, I feel like that's going to take away a little bit from that color in here. So that being said, oh gosh, I got some in my fingernail. Not used to these nails. That being said, I just feel like this shade needed to be darker. or we could probably do without this and go for a more neutral or brown, like a true neutral brown. And I feel like that would have made it a little bit better. Overall though, I really like this palette. I think the formula is great because I love Lara Sanchez. Lara Sanchez formula is amazing. Definitely one of the top 3 for me. So definitely check it out. But overall, I felt like the depth in that transition crease was missing. I wish there would have been more of a dirty mustard. I think that would have helped. Okay, I feel like we're getting to the nitty gritty. Okay, so I think we're going to number 7. 11, 10, 9, 8, yes, 7. So for number 7, I'm gonna go with my other Colourpop palette. Like I said, I definitely have a gap in my collection for cool tones. So I feel like this was a good cool tone to add to my collection. And I definitely think it gives me what that Natasha Denona palette would have given me, which is a deep gray, a more cool tone grayish brown, a more cool tone soft brown. I think this yellow actually adds a lot to the palette. And I've noticed that if I combine this yellow with any of these 2 shades, it makes it easier for me to blend into my crease, because this can look ashy on me if not properly blended or added to pigment. But they're actually quite pigmented, but I don't have too much of those problems. So I'm very grateful for that. And then this middle row, it looks quite bland, I feel like, on the pictures of Colourpop, but they're actually quite interesting. There's like a slight shift to them. They're not necessarily dual chromes. This is a slight shift to it. This one is definitely a dual chrome, but these two, there's definitely a shift to it. This one is like there's like a green undertone, just like this one has a green undertone. And then this one reminds me a little bit of Glass Bowl, but like a bronzy version of that without the shift. It's kind of hard to explain, but like I said, they're a lot more interesting than you would think. So I'm really glad that I have this. This is definitely meeting a quota. Like this is definitely filling in a gap in my collection. I think formula wise, this is again one of the good ones from Colourpop. I have heard that they're kind of like hit or miss. I've had good luck, but I also make sure to do my research. If I am going to buy a Colourpop palette, I like to watch a lot of videos prior to make sure that other people say, oh yeah, this is the good formula before I just go in and buy them. So there's that. Now, color story, I think it's very small. There's not much to it, but I think it's quite pretty, and for a cool tone palette, there's a lot you can do, and it helps you have that yellow, it helps you have this neutral, and this shifty shades right here. I feel like that helps a lot. So I actually think that for what it is, and again, it's only a 9-pan palette, you're actually getting a lot. So that was number 7. All right, so for number 6, this is a newer one. I've only really used it like once or twice, but it's gonna be a Patrick Ta Multi Dimensions 2 palette. I was very tempted to get the first one, but I decided against it because I went into Sephora and I swatched some of the shimmers, and it wasn't really quite what I was looking for. And I felt like I had a lot of those neutral, like quite neutral palettes all over my collection. But when this one dropped, I've watched a lot of videos on this one, and I saw a lot of people do comparison of this palette. And for every comparison that I saw, I'm like, I don't have that palette, I don't have that palette, I don't have a palette, I don't have that one. So I felt there wasn't a lot of overlap in my collection. So is it meeting a gap in my collection? Yes. Now, do I have these colors? I do. Because these are shades that you will have like 2 or 3 in one palette, in one neutral palette. You'll have 2 or 3 in this neutral palette, 2 or 3 in this neutral palette. So if you put all of those palettes together, you probably can make up this color story. But one palette that envisions this entire color story, I don't have it. I do think because it's multi-dimensions, it's very quite monochromatic, which is not my preference, but I don't mind it with neutrals, because I feel like with neutrals there's a lot more you can do than if you would do it with just like a colorful, like I don't need an all, blue palette. Like who the fuck is gonna do that? I just need 1 or 2 blues. But with neutrals, I feel like it's a lot easier. I will say I do appreciate that you have true shimmer metallics, which is these 2 here at the end. I do like those. And I have noticed that you definitely need to put some kind of glitter glue with some of these ones, or something tacky underneath to kind of make them stick. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some fallout throughout the day. I think this dual chrome right here is quite pretty. It's like a golden pink bronze kind of duochrome. It's not the most reflective duochrome out there. There's definitely some prettier ones, but I actually quite like this. And what I was most impressed with actually is the mattes. I think the mattes are actually quite comparable to Tatasha Nona. They might be slightly better. The mattes actually, they are surprisingly pigmented. They blend beautifully and so easily without blending away color. So this matte formula is a fucking winner. I haven't tried the creams yet, but I've heard a lot of really good things about it, which I knew the creams were like a solid. What I would like to do, Patrick Ta to do actually, is come out with these in like duos. Like sell those in duos. Because if they come out with like a duo of the original one, of the first one, of just these two cream shades, I'll buy that in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. I would be all over it. But overall, I think it's quite pretty. I really do, and I really enjoyed it. And the looks that I've done with it are really good. And I found that this plummy shades look very good with my eye color as well. And yeah, they just look good and make my eyes pop. So I quite enjoyed it. So we're gonna put that. Like I said, it's just formula wise is good, except for the shimmers. Like I said, you definitely get a good color story. It's monochromatic, you know. Leads a little bit to be desired. Gap in my collection. There was definitely a gap in my collection. I don't have anything quite like it. So, yay. All right. Top 5 now. Okay. For number 5, we're going to go with Scott Barnes. Formula 1, 10 out of 10. Like, this formula from Scott Barnes is beautiful. Again, similar to Natasha, this blend beautifully. Now, my qualm with this is that some of the shades are a little too light for me because I am naturally tanned. So some of these lighter shades, they just don't quite work for me. But the matte blend built beautifully. I think they're comparable to Natasha Nona. I would prefer Natasha's over Scott's, but just so slightly. Shimmer wise, I think they're quite pretty. He does have different formulas. I think that was I'm glad for that. Silver Screen and Nightcap right here, they're quite thicker and a little chunkier, while this ones right here are a little bit more soft shimmers, similar to like Persona Cosmetics. But then he also has this Paralyzed formula, which I think is super soft and is so pretty if you're looking for something very light. He has this one duochrome right here, Angelic, which I quite enjoy. Overall, I think it's really pretty. And for a neutral palette, you get every version of neutral you can think of. You get warm tone, you get cool tone, you get true neutrals, you get some deeper shades. This is essentially like the prettiest black, like shimmer black. That's the best way I can explain it. You get some burgundy, more orangey shades. So if you're looking for like all-arounder neutral palette, this is great. You get a lot of product in here, if I remember correctly. Yeah, you do. It's more than a gram, so I think it's like 0.05 per shadow or something like that. It might be a little more. So overall, really, really great. It's a neutral palette, and the other ones I think color story wise are a little bit more interesting. It's not filling any gaps in my collection. I do have shades like this in my collection over and over again because I love neutrals. Formula wise is outstanding. Like I said, color story, it's a neutral palette. Gap in collection, I have these, but in this formula, all in one palette, I definitely don't. It's quite good. It's really quite good. I quite enjoy it. All right, bam. For number 4, okay. I'm gonna pause and think about this because I'm in between these, but like, I don't know. I'll be right back. All right. It's been decided, but honestly, this 4, it could have been a real toss-up. It could have been any of these. For number 4, I'm gonna go with my Odins Eye and Hella palette. I do think this color story is quite unique. I don't think I have anything else quite like it. I think the greens in here are quite good, but they're different tones of green that I don't quite have anything else and can be neutralized a little bit. I think all of these colors are honestly hits, You have a more eggplant deep shade, but can look black depending on what you put underneath it. I think these yellows are quite beautiful. I don't particularly care for this deep neon pink, fuchsia pink, but it has its time and place in this palette. The shimmers are beautiful. This multi-chrome and this dual chrome are absolutely stunning. I will say I don't love the shimmer formula from Odins Eye. I think it's a little chunky. It can leave with some, what's it called? Fallout. So you might need a glitter glue. You definitely do not want to pick it up on a brush. You want to do that with your finger. And if you are going to do it with a brush, you got to find the right kind of brush to make it work. I think your finger is going to be your best bet. I think because of that, it makes it a little bit harder to work with. And that's why I'm putting it at number 4. Also, this color story is quite unique in that sense. So the color story is awesome, but I think in its day-to-day usage, it loses some of that because I feel like it's harder to use in a day-to-day. Gaps in my collection, definitely there. Formula-wise, it's actually quite good. I really enjoy the matte from Odins Eye. I think there's somewhere between good Colourpop and Scott Barnes. There's like somewhere in the middle. So overall, they're really good. But again, I think the shimmer formula is really where I'm losing it. And then the color story, although it's quite pretty, it's hard to use in a day-to-day. So I think that's how I'm putting it at number 4. Overall, I think it's a great palette and it inspires me a lot. The color story, when I'm looking at it, I'm like, inspiration, like my inspiration juices, just, they're everywhere, you know? That being said, a palette that has similar issues, but the reason actually I'm putting it at number 3 and not number 2 or 1 is actually because even though it's quite pretty, I have a hard time finding inspiration. That's gonna be my Tiny Marbles, Signy Grace, and Mel Thompson, which rest in peace. But with this palette, even though it is quite pretty, I have a hard time creating outlooks. It's like I get a mental block with it. I have watched a ton of videos with this palette to try to get more inspiration, but I will say though, it's easier to do a day-to-day look because it's one of those palettes where you can just grab 1 or 2 shades and it's easy. And even though some of the shades look quite light, they actually have so much pigment in them, and you can definitely blend them out because the Singer's one is amazing. So even though they're quite pigmented, you can definitely blend them out without losing too much of that color. And if you want to lose the color, you can definitely do that as well. But you're gonna have to work actually to lose color, which is quite hard. You definitely want to be soft-handed. There's a ton of product in here. It's 2 grams per shadow, so huge. This duochrome is quite beautiful. The only shade that I don't particularly care for is this Meadowhawk, but this is just not my kind of like shades, which is those like golden roses. I'm more like a bronze or champagne rose, not necessarily golden rose, but that's a personal preference. I definitely love the greens. I like the undertones of this shades a lot. I think there's a lot you can do with it. Like I said, I just personally get a mental block when I see this palette. This does fill in gaps in my collection. I don't quite have a shade anything quite like this. I don't have a shade anything quite like this, or quite like these ones right here, or this ones right here. Like I said, they're very unique undertones, which I do appreciate. So gap in my collections, that formula is amazing. So formula wise, top notch. I think my only qualm with this is that I just get a creative block whenever I play with this palette. I don't know why. So again, that's a personal thing. But otherwise, this palette is so easy to use. It's so nice. You can bring color. I watched a lot of people create looks with this palette and have gotten inspired by it and done things similar to them to try to like recreate it, but then kind of add some of my own twist to it. But there's that. All right, for number 2, I'm actually quite surprised I'm putting this high, but this was definitely the Natasha Denona year. I got 2 of my first meaty palettes from Natasha Denona this year. So this is the My Dream palette from Natasha Denona. I will say this is not the kind of color story that I would normally reach for, but I had such an easy time. I ended up playing with this palette, so I'll post and play with it for 1 week. Ended up playing with it for like 3 weeks. I had the easiest time with it. All of the shimmers are beautiful. The only shade that I actually surprisingly didn't get to play with is a multi-chrome, which I think is the absolutely best. There is definitely some warmth. There's some cool tones. There's some like mauve, there's some grunge. You can do so much with this palette. It's definitely not a monochromatic palette, which a lot of her meaty palettes can be slightly monochromatic, but this one isn't. I quite enjoyed it. I don't have a lot of any problems with the formula. I did try to do an all black look with this cream black one, but I definitely think I needed to set it, and I didn't set it, so it did crease on me a little bit. But if it's a cream shadow, you don't set it, it sounds like self-explanatory, but I figured the formula would be similar to like a Super Shock shadow. It isn't. It's definitely more creamy, and so that common sense should have kicked in for me, and I should have just set it, but I didn't. So that's on me. But overall, I think this palette is beautiful. There's a lot you can do with it, and there's only a few shades, but there's a lot you can do with them. There's a lot of different depths in them and buildable. Honestly, just really great palette. So there's that. No, was not expecting that one. And for number one, let me tell you that up till 2 minutes ago, I didn't even know this was going to be my number one. I was going to give it to Sashas Palette. I know a lot of people gave a lot of shit last year because that's when he came out, saying that this is not the normal Natasha Denona formula that they're used to and whatnot. That may be the case, but I think the color story is beautiful. My only problem with this palette is honestly this red, and that's just not a shade that I would normally go for. It is more toned down red. It definitely has a more neutral brown undertone to it, but I really wish that was like a really, really dark black, dark brown or a black, and I think that would have fit a little bit better. Yeah. But overall, it's really quite pretty. You have like your softer pinks, more peachy shades, you have more neutrals. I wish this brown was a little bit deeper, but it's actually more like a mid-tone, can be built to a deep brown. So that's what I'm saying. I wish it had like a really deep chocolatey brown. I think that's what it was needing. Not necessarily a black. I think that would have made it too intense, but definitely needing that. At the same time, you do have this like browned olive green, and I really enjoy all these different tones. You have a foresty green. Yama is the most beautiful duochrome ever, and Eclipse as well is quite beautiful. Even though I don't particularly go for these golden shades, this one's a little bit dirty gold, where I think it's actually a little bit prettier than I would normally go for. So overall, this was number one palette. I know it's not necessarily what others will go for, but again, I love greens and I love neutrals. So I feel like this was really just made for me. Just if that just wasn't there, it would have been better. I just don't care for that red. But overall, it's really quite pretty and I really enjoy it. That is everything. This is a really long video, so I apologize for that. But again, these are my favorite kinds of videos to talk about and do slight like mini reviews of them. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one because I think I'm filming my inventory next. We'll see. Bye guys.